Hey, Brother Glenn, thank you for riding shotgun today with me, my brother. This is Minneapolis 360. I am your host, Anthony Taylor, African American Community Specialist for the city of Minneapolis, coming to you weekly as we go along March and April. And a lot of you who've been listening to the show understand that we're going weekly simply because we are in the midst of the Derek Chauvin trial. And obviously, Minneapolis knows this quite well, and the world knows as well that the trial starts Monday. Opening statements are scheduled for Monday. And this is a second part of a two-part series, Minneapolis, around mental health and trauma support. And last week, we had the great Sam Simmons come on and talk about historical trauma and how that affects us, give us a little background on what that means, intergenerational trauma as well, and really kind of focused it around the adults. And today I have a great guest today on, and she's been on before, and I love hearing this sister talk. I will introduce her and give her roses in a few minutes. But really what I wanted to talk about first before we get started is that, we talk about a lot of negative things in our lives, obviously, because we're in the center of this worldwide movement that happened with the murder of George Floyd. And we are going to experience a lot of difficult things with this opening statement and this trial coming up, right? So there's a lot of things that I want to help us understand, because even when we turn on the television, we see traumatic events. Obviously, what happened in Atlanta with the mass killing, and then also a few days later with the mass killings in Boulder, Colorado. It seems like, and it's the way I feel, and I know others may feel like that everything I see on TV, in the news, on my phone, on my social media accounts is traumatic events. And so we talk about these things because I think it's important for us to understand how we can be able to center ourselves around traumatic events, how to be able to recognize it, and how to be able to move forward. But more importantly, I think we sometimes think that this is an adult issue, and it's not, right? Trauma affects us all, and especially our young people and our babies. I think as adults, we move around the world so much with taking care of home and taking care of work and responsibilities that I think there are times when we neglect the fact that our children have access to this information as well. I can't walk down the street and not see anybody in the world anymore without their phones. And some of our children, and let's be honest, adults, some of our children have better phones than we do. So I think it's important to understand that, being able to have a conversation around trauma. What are we going to see? How do we experience it? How can we center ourselves during this time? I think it's important. So with that being said, this is a wonderful sister that's been on the show before. Dr. Lolita King, clinical psychologist at North Point Health and Wellness, has been on the show before. And if you listen to the show last time, she dropped some bars, ladies and gentlemen, in Minneapolis, around a lot of ways that we can help protect ourselves and our children and center ourselves. So it is my honor and my privilege, and a big welcome back to Dr. Lolita King. Dr. King, how are you doing, sis? And welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Bill, and thank you for the invitation to return and have this dialogue about the issues that are at hand in our community.
And Dr. King, explain to us, what do you do for North Point Health and Wellness? I know you're a senior clinical psychologist, but give us some more information on how you operate and how you work with our people in the community.
Yeah, I've been at North Point over 10 years now, and my role is to provide individual therapy. And I also do some supervision, because I think it's important to pave the way for other professionals to come along and join in this work that we're doing with community. So that's been very important to me as well. But basically, I work with children, adolescents, and adults around issues that they need to take a look at, and problems in their life, and find ways that they can better cope with the circumstances that are in their life that are impeding their ability to function in the way that they would like to.
And as we talk about, I'm sorry, Dr. King, go ahead.
No, I said like to and deserve to also. We deserve to better experiences, and I try to help people get that for themselves.
And Dr. King, the reason that I wanted you to come on the show today, and I appreciate your time, sister, and I know that you are super busy, but we had Sam Simmons come on last week, and he talked about intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, and really kind of focused on adults. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring you back to the show, because obviously we're dealing in some difficult times ahead, and what we see and we hear in our news and how we get our news is just disturbing, right? So as you work with our youth and our children, talk about some of the things that young people could be experiencing. What are some of the signs about trauma? And they can't vocalize it as well as some of us can, but just how does that impact our babies, Dr. King?
Right. One of the things that I try to tell parents and other adults is that children don't necessarily have the words or the space to really express how they're feeling. So oftentimes it comes out in behaviors, right? And so what they can't say, they act out. And it may be misinterpreted. But some of the things that you might see in our children might be things like sadness, frustration, anger outbursts, bedwetting, nightmares. So you might see a child who regresses, for example. So this child has been potty trained and they've been doing well for a year or so. And during times of stress, you might see that they start to bedwet again, or they aren't as independent in terms of getting their clothes on, or, for example, they become more needy. You might find them tantruming, crying a lot, refusing to do schoolwork, increased anxiety about leaving home or leaving the parent's side. So there are all kinds of things that you might see isolating. But that children, again, may look a little different from adults when it comes to experiencing trauma and stressful events.
And as a parent, Dr. King, how does that affect a parent when you don't really understand and know what's kind of going on, right? Because if I see my child doing just weird things, right, how does one kind of as a parent kind of be able to understand or even like recognize that or be able to even address it if you see these things and you haven't seen them before?
I coach parents to be curious with their children. So, for example, if you see that they are having a lot more conflicts with their siblings, you could just pull them aside and say, tell me about what's going on. You look frustrated. You hit your younger brother. Can you tell me about what's going on the inside? If you can't tell me, draw it. But being curious about what's going on. I also talk about, like you mentioned, that kids have access to a lot more information than maybe we would like them to in terms of the traumatic, stressful times we're in now. And so I would be curious about that as well. Tell me about what you know about COVID, and let them explain in their own words what that is and what they know about it, and give them age-appropriate information. They don't have to know everything you know, but you do want to fill in gaps where they might have questions or concerns.
We are talking to Dr. Lolita King, clinical psychologist for North Point Health and Wellness, talking today about our children and our babies and how we can definitely help them during these times. And Dr. King, I think one of the most important things that I wanted to kind of talk to you about today is being able to stay balanced, right? When you're having these conversations and you're hearing these things like this trial, like how can folks just help themselves be centered around a lot of these difficult information that we're getting? What are some suggestions and some solutions for folks to be able to stay balanced during this time?
Sure. Well, self-care is so important. One of the misconceptions that we have, I think, as a people is that we need to be selfless, and that anytime we focus on self, that it's being selfish. And that's not the case. There's a difference between being selfish and self-care, right? So selfishness is all about me all the time. And self-care is kind of like that metaphor with the car. It can't run well if it doesn't have the gas, the oil, etc. So you need to be taking care of yourself so that you can function well. Well, what does that mean? That means looking at eating healthy, sleeping well, moving, exercise, so taking the time to have the mind, body, spirit well and balanced, maintaining social connections, finding a space to discuss your feelings. So that's what therapy allows for. But we also have family and friends in the community, and just holding space for one another to really unpack the emotions that come up with being in these heightened times of stress that we're having now.
And Dr. King, one of the questions that I asked Sam was, how healthy is it to kind of read and watch so much of this trial going on? Is it healthy? Do you have to create a balance between watching this trial? I mean, talk to us a little bit about that. Is it healthy? I mean, what can you do?
Yeah, I think we need to be really careful about how much we consume and how often. Now, do we need to be aware? Absolutely. We need to know what's going on. But with the way that the media works now, it's on constantly, all day, every day. And you get that on social platforms as well. But we need to give ourselves permission to take a break from that, cutting down the time we spend on things that may be triggering to us, and maybe getting a recap, but not right before you go to bed, right? But finding a time in the day where you just kind of get updated information, and then you take care of yourself and digest what you've learned, and then move forward with your regular day routine, because you can become so consumed that it could, just kind of take you to a place where you're not functioning well and not handling it well, but you're not even realizing it.
And one of the things I think is important, right? And I'm glad you brought that up, is like you do want to stay informed. And there's a balance, because, and I'm glad you talked about triggers, right? Knowing your triggers and finding out, what is going to take you to a point where you just are out of it, right? And all of you see, and it consumes you, and you go to bed, and then you wake up and you get notifications on your phone. I mean, a lot of times I think, and you talked about it, it's definitely not healthy, right? So
Right.
my question to you, Dr. King, is that if this outcome in this trial is not what you want, right? How do you prepare yourself for that? Is that even possible, Dr. King? Because a lot of times we've as people of color and black folks, we've seen this movie before, so to speak, right? So we've seen that there's evidence, there's video evidence that we see, and a lot of times the outcome is that police officers get off, right? So, and that's what I mean by kind of seeing this movie. So is it a way, or is it possible to kind of prepare yourself for an outcome that you're not looking for?
That's a good question. We can do as much as we can to prepare for, disappointments, anger, the injustices that we may feel, as much as we can. Now, trauma, when it's triggered, can make you feel powerless and feeling that you don't have any control over anything. But you do have control if you plan for it, of your emotions, in terms of how do you process that. There are healthy ways, and there may be some ways that don't serve us as an individual or a community. So we can be really planful about, if this doesn't go as planned, where can I go to unpack my disappointment, frustration, whatever? Do I have a friend group or a community group that's doing some type of dialogue? Where do I need to go to take care of myself and my family? So we don't ignore that something happened, but we do things that might be detrimental to ourselves and the community, in terms of a reaction, or do we say, we've been through this before. What can we do now that will add to us healing and moving forward collectively, as opposed to dissension and things that may hurt our community in the long run, like rioting, for example.
We are talking with Dr. Lolita King, clinical psychologist at North Point Health and Wellness. And Dr. King, and you brought this up, and I love when you talk about this too, and everything that you talk about. And one of the things that I would love for you to speak to Minneapolis about is exactly like, why is it important for us to heal as a community? Like, we as a people are always in tune to us, right? We love to be around each other, our community, our fellowship, the way we interact, just being in community. Just talk to us about collectively healing as a community, and why is that so important?
Yeah, it's so important because first we have to acknowledge that something happened. Oftentimes things happen in our community. What happened to Mr. Floyd is he wasn't the first, and unfortunately, the way things are going, he may not be the last in terms of the violence that was depicted. The fact that it was aired on national TV is the only difference. Not that we haven't seen that before, right? But
right.
We have to give ourselves some permission to say, yes, this happened again, right? But that we deserve to heal, to have ourselves be whole, so that we can move forward with the agenda of us surviving beyond this as a people. And what does that look like? Well, that means that you have to be in tune with your own emotions. You have to be in tune with how this has impacted you, but also how it impacts us as a people. And we have healing circles. We have all kind of resources and community-based organizations who are providing a platform and the space for us to kind of join together and say, how do we move forward? How do we heal what has happened in the past, and how do we prepare for what we might face in the future? But if we don't acknowledge it, or we don't give it words and voice, then we won't heal from it.
And Dr. King, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that's where you can also get into therapy. That's a great medium for just kind of unpacking what has happened to you and us as an individual, but also collectively as a people, and how and fit in with the solutions of how do you want to be a part of moving forward.
Yeah, and Dr. King, I'm sorry I interrupt you. With this delay that we have when you work remotely is difficult. And I can't wait to get you back into the studio, right? So we can be able to talk and I can see you. So I don't want to interrupt you, sister. So I apologize.
No problem.
One of the things too, can you talk about therapy, right, in the Black community? And at times, during our existence here, and there was a stigma around folks, being able to go to therapy and admitting that they need therapy. But obviously, I think that's shifted. There may be still some folks who think that may be a sign of weakness or things like that. Can you just talk about the importance of being able to admit or accept the fact that therapy is something that you need, and the value that it brings to you and your soul when you're able to kind of express and feel some of the things that you need to get off, where you might not be able to have someone like you talked about to unpack some of those things that you're dealing with. So can you kind of talk about a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Therapy is just a fancy medical version of what our people have been doing for hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
And our ancestors used to talk to the designated elder, the healer, the knowledge holder in our communities, in our societies. We've lost that. We've always been a verbal people, and through storytelling, the elders in the community will allow for people to have that space. now we have what's called a therapist. And the therapist is not doing anything to you. I think that's a misconception. I'm not doing anything to people when they come and sit with me. What I do is serve as a witness and to their story, and try to attempt to hold some of those complicated emotions that are a result of living life, right, in here in America. So there should not be any shame in wanting to do better for yourself and for your family. So I hold up a mirror and say, this is what you told me about who and whose you are. How do we move forward, and how do you live a life that is meaningful to you? And I think that we've all been impacted by the pandemic, so a lot of people are feeling alone and isolated. But you have to realize that human connection is also healing, So just having one person that's not judging, not giving advice, but is saying, you're valuable enough for me to hear your story. And how do we negotiate what you've been through and get you to where you deserve to be in your life?
Dr. Lolita King, clinical psychologist, North Point Health and Wellness. Dr. King, how does one be able to kind of connect resources that's available in their city, and especially in Minneapolis?
There are several ways. Well, North Point, we are a community clinic over in North Minneapolis off of Plymouth and Penn. And we take persons with no insurance. We have sliding fees, and our number is 612-543-2500. And we have people that do great work with trauma-informed and trauma-specific care. And what I love about North Point is that I walk into the clinic and I have people that look like me. People that look like me. And so that's one way. You can look at community resources. We also have a booklet that is out, and you probably can find it on the web as well, that has a collection of all of the providers of color in it, and it was put out by the Black Psychologists Association. So you can do a little homework and see who would you like to meet with. Right now, a lot of people are doing telehealth, so we're doing therapy over the telephone or doing it by telehealth where we're doing video visits. Some people are meeting in person, social distancing, of course, but there are all kinds of ways to get the help that you need now. And that's been great because it closes down some of those barriers that some people have in terms of being able to get to the clinic for financial reasons, or having children and not having someone to care for them while they're trying to take care of their own needs.
And absolutely, Dr. King. I think so much of us and everybody around the world really misses that contact. And I'm glad that North Point is able to provide some services. I mean, everybody knows North Point, well-established, respected place that folks can go. I know earlier they're still probably doing vaccinations and COVID, maybe not vaccination, but COVID testing for sure. And it's important to understand that North Point is always going to be there. And when you say that the most about walking in and seeing people who look like you is such a benefit, because it just eases our comfort level, right? And we know that we've got professional brothers and sisters there that are able to help us, and we can open up more freely when it comes to talking to each other, Dr. King. So I'm glad you said that. And I have one last. Go ahead, Dr. King. I'm sorry.
A couple of crisis numbers as well. So, kids are going back to school now, so we do have school social workers in a lot of the schools that can refer you to therapy or a mental health provider, your family doctor, their local organizations. And then there's the crisis 24/7 numbers that you can use if you have an acute crisis. And that number would be 596-1222, I'm sorry, 1223. Children under 17 would call 348-2233. And then there's also a text for crisis callers, and that is 274-747. But if you call any of those numbers or mediums, that you can get the care that you need, get referred to those services. And we are doing COVID vaccinations. I need to say that also as well at North Point.
Yeah, I love me some North Point. That's just the truth. Adults over 18, 612-596-1223. Children under 17, 612-348-2233. Also, you can text crisis 274-747 to get the help you need. And as we run up against the clock, Dr. King, just briefly tell us, how can we make a difference during this difficult time as people?
Well, we need to be taking care of each other. So if you have resources or know of resources, you share it with your community, your neighbors. There are all kinds of resources for food and clothing, things of that nature, helping people with bills in the community. So if you have any of those, share them with your neighbors. Stay connected with your family and friends. Be kind to yourself. Get those emergency resources in place, because soon some of these safety nets that have been put into place will go away. So make sure you have contacted programs for emergency assistance for lights, gas, rent. They're all available, and there are tons of resources that are on the Hennepin County website, so that you want to start looking at that and getting those things into place as we open the world back up, I guess we should say.
Dr. Lolita King, clinical psychologist at North Point Health and Wellness. Sister, I know you are busy. I appreciate you for coming on the show. Every time you've been on, you gave some wonderful information, the ease of how you give it, and I know our community is appreciative of you taking the time to being with us today. So I really appreciate you, Dr. King, for being on this show, and thank you once again.
Thank you. God bless.
Dr. King, y'all.
Yeah.
Really. No, I was just saying, like, Dr. King, I want to give you your roses in Minneapolis. It was my privilege and my pleasure to come to you today on this show. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Tune in next week, and God bless. And thank you, Dr. King, again.